Dana, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here. Glad to do it. Glad to see you all and talk to you.
Likewise. So I've actually got the Shein website open on a different tab, and I can see a top for sale for €2.48. I can see a dress for €8.92. I mean, how is Shein able to produce clothing this cheap? And what kind of impact does the way that it produces, what kind of impact does that have on the planet?
Well, the reason it's able to produce it so cheap is, it's a couple several points. The first is cheap labor. Super, super, super cheap labor. If something costs €2, that means the person who's making it is being paid 2 cents. So it's super cheap labor, and they may be even paid nothing because a lot of this now is being done by robots. There is no labor. There's just machines, machines, machines. The second thing is, of course, they're using the cheapest materials out there, and that would be polyester, nylon, petroleum-based materials that never biodegrade because they're basically plastic. And as the price of petroleum keeps dropping, and we have a surplus of it right now, polyester is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And then, of course, the third biggest reason is because their business model is based on volume. And, the whole idea that if you produce, it's cheaper to produce 100 than it is to produce 80, but times that, put a few more zeros on the end of that, like many more zeros. So they're based in volume, moving volume. So the more volume they move, the cheaper they can sell it for because they can just keep jamming out the same thing over and over and over again. And then the fourth main reason is because they have hardly any overhead besides the materials and the robots and some labor. They don't have stores. Their marketing campaigns are on social media. They're not buying pages in Vogue, right? Or they're not putting on commercials on television, the things that normally cost a lot of money in advertising. They're doing super cheap advertising, and they have no overhead in the retail space. It's all direct to consumer. It's all online. It's really easy. And they can flip, lastly, on a dime really fast. If something's not working, they stop it like that, and they try something else that works. It goes really fast. And then if it takes off, goes viral, truly, then they can just keep making it, making it until people get tired of it. So there's a lot of different reasons, but put that all together and you get the €2 shirt.
And what impact does that have on the planet?
Well, it's a disaster on so many different levels. So first of all, like I said, petroleum-based materials like polyester, nylon, neoprene, spandex, stuff that gives you stretch. That's all made, petroleum-based. It never biodegrades. Scientists say, oh, it'll biodegrade in 1,000 years, but are you going to be around in 1,000 years to see if it actually biodegraded? I don't think so. So, it's plastic, and so that's just super toxic. And then we only recycle 1%, if even, of all our clothes. So most of these clothes wind up in the dump, in landfill, where they're never going to biodegrade. And when they do sort of start moldering in the earth, they start leaching all these toxic chemicals and nastiness because they're petroleum based. And then they're also using toxic dyes that are really bad for the planet and bad for us. Just let's talk about denim for a second. Cheap denim is dyed with synthetic indigo, and synthetic indigo has things in it like formaldehyde and cyanide and aniline, which has been proven to cause cancer. So, and you want to put that against your skin, which is which is our largest organ and it's most porous. Yeah, no, why would you ever do that? So, those spy movies where the guy has a cyanide pill in his in his ring, and he can, you could just eat your jeans. So, of course, and when that goes in a landfill and it starts moldering in the land, all that stuff leaches into our water tables too, and then it affects nature, it affects plants, it affects our water systems, it affects us, it all leaches into us. And then lastly, the most important thing that's really terrible about these clothes, besides them never biodegrading and they being toxic to the water table, and we're overproducing them and we have way too many, is that they release microfibers when washed because they're plastic microfibers. And I thought that this was kind of a bad thing, but I didn't realize how bad it was till I started really researching it. Did you know that approximately 1 million microfibers are released in every load of laundry we do?
Oh God, no, I didn't know that.
Right. And do you think that your washing machine has any kind of filter to catch them? Yeah, no, because that costs money, and the washing machine people don't like to spend money either. So uh, that gets all flushed into our water systems. That gets washed into our seas, into our reservoirs, into everything, into our rivers, everywhere. There's been microfibers been found in Antarctica. Microfibers been found in the rain in the Rockies. Microfibers have been found floating in the air in London. So it's not just bad for the planet, it's bad for us.
This is why my husband makes me wash all our polyester things in a special
In a
anti-microfiber
special bag.
bag.
I wrote about that
Ah,
little bag. I wrote about that bag, the Guppy bag, right?
Yeah,
I wrote about that for British Vogue, and I really hope some of my readers went out and bought it. The Guppy bag is great. Yeah,
yeah, it's a
it
clever
helps.
little
It's
invention.
not it's not the perfect solution, but it helps. I mean, the perfect solution is just to not buy polyester, but of course we are, because it's only 2 years a piece. And
Hmm.
if you spill something on it, it's cheaper to buy a new one than it is to dry clean it.
Well, it's clear that Shein has a lot of questions to answer about its sustainability and what it's doing to the planet. It also has quite a lot of questions to answer about some things that have been appearing on its website. And I mean, how is it possible that something as gross as childlike sex dolls could end up for sale on this website? And also apparently
Well,
weapons.
I know, you know, that's That's what happens when there's no oversight, and that's what happens in a globalized society. All the things that I just mentioned weren't happening 50 years ago. We weren't overproducing to the way we are today. We weren't using all these toxic materials like we are today. We weren't paying people half a living wage like we are today. We weren't paying, having people work in factories that have collapsed and killed them. And I mean, as the norm, of course, sweatshops have always existed, but as the norm, paying people half a living wage, not offering them things that we take for granted, such as vacation time, overtime. Like, oh, I worked 14 hours today, but I'm only still getting paid what I would get paid if I stayed 8. And
mm.
you can't not stay. You can't leave after 8. They make you do the overtime. Maternity leave, working in a place that doesn't where you don't suffer from sex abuse and physical abuse and verbal abuse. 50 years ago, that wasn't going on because we produced in countries that had oversight and unions that made sure that those laws were enforced. But all of it moved offshore during the age of globalization after the passage of NAFTA and other similar laws, CAFTA in the United States and NAFTA, and then similar laws in Europe. And in our globalized society, things move to countries where there is zero oversight. And, it's the wild, wild west. There is no regulation. And so that's what you get.
And do you think Shein's practices are worse than those of other fast fashion companies?
I don't know. I don't know because it's so opaque.
Okay.
But what I do know is that H&M is the largest producer in Bangladesh, and I've visited factories in Bangladesh, and while they may be using the very nice factories and not the ones that collapse on you, on workers, they still only pay workers half a living wage.
Mm.
And they continued to produce in Myanmar after the coup d'etat, and basically were financially supporting the junta by continuing to produce there for a good long time.
Mm.
I'm not sure if they still are because I haven't checked recently, but there were protests, and rightly so, because that's bad.
I mean, even before the news about the sex dolls, there was already a pretty big backlash here in France over plans to open this first permanent physical store for Shein in Europe. And, at the same time, more than 50,000 people have been to that shop in just the first few days. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to figure out what people actually want. Like, what do you think the response to this store opening says about how consumers actually feel about fast fashion?
Well, the store opening for me is one of the wiliest moves I've seen in a long time because, they weren't in the bricks and mortar business. And then the French passed a law saying if you only are an online fast fashion retailer and you don't have stores in Europe, we're going to pass this legislation to rein you in. And that was clearly because they were trying to pass an anti-fast fashion law. And Zara and H&M and Mango and Gap and the others have very powerful lobbies and basically said, listen, a lot of us are European companies. You can't do this to your European companies that we have stores all over you want us to close our stores all over France? We will close our stores all over France. So, okay, they're like, okay, if you have stores, you can keep doing what you're doing. But if you're only doing direct to consumer, basically Timo and Shein, then we're going to come down on you. So what did Shein do? They opened a store. I mean, that was probably the fastest meeting they ever had. Right? Oh, how do we get around this law? Let's just open a store. And what's more, they didn't just open a store, they opened it across the street from City Hall. Like, right? La 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 la. So, and then they're opening them all over the country. So now the French aren't going to come down on them because they're opening them up in these not small towns, but sort of secondary cities where the city centers have been gutted by suburban sprawl. And they're opening in these department stores in the city centers. So this is going to bring commerce and business into these dead city centers, so they can't really complain. So, but what do consumers want? I mean, this is the problem, and this is actually why I wrote my book Fashionopolis, because a lot of people don't know what the impact of not just these fashion brands, but all of globalization has had on planet and humanity. So, most, I would say, of those 50,000 who've gone to the Shein store at the BHV down the street, I would bank that 49,000 of them had no idea that, the impact that this company has on the planet and people. And if they did, they might have a second thought about it. Or they might just say, well, too bad, I can't afford to pay more for clothes. And that's the most interesting and difficult part of the problem to fix, because we've been conditioned to think that it's normal and it's okay to be paying so little for clothes. Clothes have never been cheaper than they are today. We spent, 15 or 16 or up to 20% of our annual income on clothing a generation ago. And we were buying 1/5 the amount of clothes that we do today. Now that is in the low single digits, that piece of the pie, but we're buying 5 times more. So I believe that most of the people who are shopping at Shein and Temu have no idea. And I should just probably go out and stand in front of the BHV and hand out copies of my book.
Now that's a sales strategy.
And so, of the heat has so far been on the fast fashion companies, but I was wondering, do the leading haute couture fashion houses, especially the French ones in this context, do they also have ethical, sustainable questions to answer? Or because people are paying more money for it, is it a much cleaner industry?
Oh, no, don't be silly. Of course not. No, they're not as bad, because their volumes aren't quite so vast, though. I mean, let's just take one small example. Louis Vuitton, the largest luxury brand in the world. It does the same amount of revenue every year as Zara. Now, they are selling less than Zara because their things cost 100 to 200 to 300 times more. But those famous monogram bags that everybody covets, which it makes up almost all of their sales, frankly. I mean, how often do you see people wearing Louis Vuitton fashion? Never, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody really just wants that monogram bag, which has been around since the late 19th century. And they want the keep all, especially, or the little backpack, which is a newer design of the same thing. That canvas is coated with PVC. PVC is toxic plastic varnish. So that's a lot of handbags covered with toxic plastic varnish, right? And I know they're a sustainability person, and I know that they're trying to find a cleaner varnish to put on that canvas. And they haven't yet, as far as I know. They have not rolled it out, certainly on the mass scale. They might be trialing things. But of course, it's hard to find something that'll be as durable as that plastic toxic varnish. Luxury fashion is so afraid to lose money and to do something different than they've ever done before, because they might lose money and they don't want to lose and alienate their customers. So they don't want to change anything. They don't want to swap out regenerative organic cotton for regular cotton, because they too also care a lot about profits. They have shareholders and they have to answer those shareholders. I mean, Bernard Arnault is the world's richest man, and you don't become the world's richest man by paying everybody what they're worth all along your supply chain, or more than what they're worth. You know, you make sure your costs are low and your profits are high. So, you know, it's the same business model as any business. I mean, that's what the responsibility, your fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders is. You know, bring them back as much profits as possible. And that's why when I wrote my first book, Deluxe, How Luxury Lost Its Luster, the argument was that I don't believe you can be a luxury company and be publicly traded, because as long as you're worrying about how much money your shareholders are making as opposed to how beautiful your product is, you are no longer producing luxury. You're just making expensive, mass-produced stuff.
Yeah, it's weird to think about all of those LV handbags in 1,000 years being in the same landfill as all of the stuff from
hopefully,
Shein.
because they're so durable, they'll just keep being used. That's what they're telling you, at least, right?
That would be nice. Back in 2022 on this podcast, we talked about this big plan by the EU to crack down on the fast fashion industry, and that felt quite exciting at the time. I haven't heard that much about it since then. Have there been any legal changes or policy changes, either on like a European level or nationally somewhere in Europe, that are actually forcing fast fashion companies like Shein to behave differently?
There's ways of negotiating around the laws, of course. There's always, I know of one fast fashion brand, after the EU passed some of its laws, that built into its budget for the next 5 years, all the fines are going to pay for non-compliance, because they had no intention of complying.
Wow.
As they continue to fight the law, because it would be cheaper to pay the fines than it would to be comply.
That's depressing.
It's just annoying as all get out.
Yeah.
And it really is a beast. But here's the thing. Even if they pass all the laws, even if they manage to shut down the Shein store at the BHV, what we're getting happily is choice. That this isn't the only thing out there. Everyone that buys a sustainable, patronizes a sustainable brand or secondhand shopping, that's one less new thing or one less toxic thing. The secondhand business, for example, its studies say that secondhand sales will outstrip first-time sales in luxury fashion, maybe all fashion, it's not quite sure yet, by 2030. So it's not our responsibility. It's the petroleum industry that created the idea of the carbon footprint and punted it back onto us. It's their responsibility. But they'll listen if we vote with our purse. We have the power of the purse. So if we only buy the organic stuff, then they'll be giving us more organic stuff. Or if we only go for wool again as opposed to polyester, they'll give us more wool. So, if you buy good jeans that are dyed with natural indigo, they'll give you more blue jeans with natural indigo. We have the power. We just have to use it.